The story begins with the fact that a group of criminals kidnapped a boy and hid in a dilapidated warehouse, the address of which was not even on the map. And then they began to demand a ransom from his father. They expected that he would be very concerned about his son and quickly send the required amount. But this did not happen, and they thought that he did not care about him at all. Meanwhile, the boy was sitting on the floor and was shaking with fear. He could never have thought that such a thing would happen to him. We began to remember happy moments from his life and suddenly saw a light from the street. The robbers did not understand why the gates began to rise. And behind them was the silhouette of a person. The hostage did not understand what was happening and who he was. He went into the middle of the warehouse and saw that the boy was being held hostage. He came even closer to understand the whole situation. It was logical to guess that it was the kidnapping of a minor. The men immediately pounced on him with questions. They thought he was a student and asked how he got into the warehouse. They were only worried about him not calling the police. One of the men began to press him and came very close. He started waving his hands in front of his face. These were his memories from the past. And he could not clearly explain what exactly happened that day. That day, the police and firefighters came to the warehouse, because the warehouse was destroyed. Also, an ambulance that collected victims and provided first aid to those who needed it. The police asked the boy if he knew how to contact his family. He began to write down the phone numbers of his parents on paper. And the boy who helped him to escape was thanked and told that he could be free and go home. The teenager looked in his direction and thought. It seemed to him that he was a superhero in a past life. And the boy heard it and returned to him. It frightened him and he did not want to draw his attention to himself. Then he came closer to the teenager. And he said that it was true, and in his past life he really was a superhero. He then added that he had been in much worse situations than this and had to save the whole world, not just one teenager. The teenager was already very scared, and these words seemed very strange to him. 2 weeks after the situation that happened, his life changed. Hun had been keeping an eye on this guy who had saved him for the past 2 weeks. He very confidently stated that he was a hero in a past life, and it sounded very believable. It was his mysterious saving grace. He didn't look like a liar at all. Hun followed him and observed what he was doing and what he was doing in his ordinary life. That day, a grandmother approached him and asked to show her how to get to a certain street. He kindly helped her. Hun's eyes hurt a lot from the light around him. Can he even be called a savior after everything that happened? On the day he appeared at the warehouse, the men demanded an explanation from him. He asked to be more careful with his words and movements. At that moment, a very large iron beam falls between the man and the boy. Hun was shocked how they were lucky to survive after such a thing. The rest of the criminals also did not understand what was happening and where it came from. The man who was talking to the boy in general began to tremble with fear. Then he took a few steps back and fell back. The guy stood still and didn't even get scared, but he also wondered where she came from. Hun tried to hide behind the slabs because he thought a fight might break out and he would be able to escape. The boy turned to him and asked if he was brought here against his will and desire. At first he was nervous and did not know what to answer and how to act correctly. But then he clearly said that it was true. Outside, leaves began to rise into the air, but none of them noticed. Then these leaves began to be covered by an incomprehensible energy, and it became more and more. One of the leaves flew straight to the boy and circled next to him. Then he began to move towards the criminals who were standing near the barrel with flames. After a while, he flew to the barrel and fell right into the middle. Although it looked wet enough, it still caught fire very quickly. A fiery leaf was already heading towards one of the men. He started to run away. And by chance, when he was dodging, he hit a barrel with fire and it fell. The fire began to spread throughout the warehouse. The men were in a panic and one of them touched the gasoline canister. She fell and the fire went straight in her direction and engulfed her completely. They started looking for water to put out the flames. Hun noticed that when this guy appeared, very strange things began to happen around him. The automatic garage door accidentally opened. Then a beam just happened to fall. Then, due to a leaf that accidentally flew, the whole place accidentally caught fire. Then, just by chance, a passerby appeared nearby and called the police. And it all happened that day. This escape was literally a miracle. He spent all his luck that day. Hun continued to follow him because he wondered how it all connected. While he was helping the grandmother, a police car drove up to them. And the man said that they were looking for this guy everywhere. Because they had to thank him for helping to catch dangerous criminals. The grandmother added that he also helped her. The soldier handed the boy a case full of money, but he refused to take it. And for the entire time of the investigation, Hun realized that this kind of thing happens to this guy all the time. In one day, 5 different people tried to thank him for his help. Wherever he went, he was offered discounts, freebies, and food from all sides. He was constantly pursued by luck. He won cars in lotteries. Hun really wanted to know who he was. Because he did not look like an ordinary person. The father wrote to Hun that the movers had already arrived at the place with all the boxes and asked his son to bring them. He needed to go home, unpack his things and see where the university was. Also, on the way home, it was necessary to go to the supermarket and buy something tasty. The boy seemed to understand that Hun had been following him all day. This area was large enough, but he would be able to remember the way. Fortunately, he was able to find a nice room with reasonable rent. Of course, he will have to strictly plan his budget first. But he can't believe that he managed to enter Chonshin University on a full scholarship. He was very glad that he will study in the scholarship program in Korean. It is new and appeared rather unexpectedly, but it was the right decision to choose it. There's been a lot of good news lately. Found a nice home and got a scholarship. Although he was kidnapped, he was saved, so he's still lucky. He noticed that he started using the word lucky a lot. The fire was a coincidence. As with the passerby who called the police. Firemen rescued him from the building. But for some reason he still had the feeling that it was this guy who saved him. He really wanted to thank him, but for what? He had mixed feelings. This guy's words that he saved the world in a past life didn't leave Hun. He decided that the boy just decided to make a joke like that. Hun went to the supermarket and bought everything he needed. While he was on business, the savior's friends were looking for him. And they found him. To them, he looked like an ordinary passerby. The girl, who was also with this guy, called the rescuer. And she said that they found the teenager whom he saved. This was an exceptional case and they should check everything themselves. They expected a savior, but he could not drive in his new car. Which he won the lottery because he didn't have a driver's license. And so Hun finally reached his home, which was located not far from the center. He sat down on his doorstep and began to undress next to his briefcase. When he got up, he saw a mirror nearby and decided to stop by it. He remembered his band-aid and decided to take it off because it had been long enough. Hun literally just entered the house and was about to leave again. But his father saw him and said that he thought that the classes would only start tomorrow, so he asked where he was going to go. He replied that he simply hadn't been on campus yet, so he decided to check things out before the semester started. The father said that he had the day off, so he offered to have dinner together. They hadn't been together like that for a long time. The father warned his son to be careful and not to talk to strangers. The guy put on his shoes and said he would be back soon and they could have dinner. Hun tried to find his campus, but he went deep into the city and got lost. Before moving, he did not know that big cities can be confusing with their small and narrow streets. Hun tried to figure out where he came from and where he was now. Since he couldn't do anything, he decided to ask passers-by, because it was a very famous university. He approached the people standing nearby and said that he had recently moved and asked for help in figuring out where he is now. But they did not even listen to him and waved their hands and went about their business. He was very angry and did not expect the townspeople to be so mean. The guy continued to figure things out on his own and decided to just move on. When he turned around, a passerby bumped into him. Hun's note fell from his pocket to the ground from this blow. The boy quickly picked it up and asked if he had dropped it. He noticed that it was a map of Chongqing University. Hun said that he was trying to find his way to it. The boy guessed that he wanted to ask passers-by how to get to this place, but they ignored him. He also went to this university. Then the guy asked if he was a freshman. Hun was happy and asked this guy to show him the way. He then picked up his note that he had lost earlier. When he took the note, something happened to the boy's face. Hun asked what the reason was, but he replied that everything was fine. He once again turned to the boy and showed him where his institute was located. He also advised the next time, when he asks for help, to speak to the point immediately. Because otherwise, people may think that he is a fraud if he talks a lot. Hun didn't understand how it was connected, but he promised to listen to the advisor. He stood still for a few minutes, confused. Hun understood that this was a very unusual guy and wanted to leave already. But he asked to stay for a moment. He said that it will rain today, so he asked him to go home as soon as he finished. The teenager was even more surprised and even started to be a little afraid. Hun followed his advice, but it turned out to be a mistake. It didn't lead him to the university, but to the sleeping area. Not to mention that it sent him in the complete opposite direction. He was so angry that it made him even hotter. Hun looked around and saw a vending machine with cold drinks. He took out his wallet and began to count the money he had left. Hun pulled one coin out of it, but couldn't hold it properly and it fell out of his hand. The coin did not just fall, but jumped out and rolled parallel to the road. But after a certain distance, it spun around and fell to the ground. As soon as the teenager was about to pick up his coin, someone's hand reached for it from the other side. When he got very close to him, he only managed to see black male hair. Then they head-butted each other as they reached for the coin. Hun immediately apologized to this guy. Although he was not the only one to blame for the situation. This guy was in a company of 3 people. He became aggressive, accusing Hun of hitting him. When Hun saw them, he immediately thought about how lucky he was to meet strange people. They began to ask him to come and the situation looked quite dangerous. The teenager thought that the best solution would be to try to escape. Therefore, he wanted to turn sharply in the other direction and start running. But one of the boys easily grabbed him by the collar and began to say that he attacked him first, and now he wants to run away. He began to complain that now he had a headache and it must be a concussion. Hun offered to go with him to the hospital to check everything. The boy did not like such an answer and rejected him to his friends. He did not need guardianship. He needed compensation for the damage caused. And he began to shake his knapsack. He found his wallet, but there were only coins in it. There were 10,000 won in coins. They thought he was poor. He didn't even have a bank card. Hun did not understand what to do in this situation. It seemed hopeless. But while they were mocking, the boy who had saved him earlier jumped from the tree. He was very agile and landed right on top of 2 of his companions. Hun couldn't believe that he would save him yet again. The guy also recognized Hun and was surprised. Hun stopped believing in coincidence when this guy was around. The teenager asked why he jumped from the tree. He said he was helping the child get the kite. The toy got stuck in the tree, and he got up and took it off. While he was telling this, one of the hooligans was scared and angry at the same time. The hooligan threatened to report both of them to the police for the beating. The boy was surprised by this statement, although at that time he was sitting on the heads of his comrades. While they were trying to find at least some kind of compromise, the boy who was helped to take down the kite started calling his mother very loudly. He told her that Juan and his friends were doing bad things again. She immediately ran up and started screaming. The woman said they should be at school now, not here. She also promised to call her parents and other boys. She let them escape, decided to let them go unpunished this time. They dropped all of Hun's belongings and ran away very quickly. While they were packing, Hun was surprised that he had reappeared to help him. The boy was interested in looking at his things and notebooks. He saw an inscription on the paper that Hun studied at the Chanshan Institute. The teenager said that he was going there, but got lost. He said he would go with him because he also needed to go to this place. He also said that some people want to meet him. Hun was surprised because he didn't even know this guy, much less his acquaintances. Then the teenager remembered the hooligans and it seemed to him that they were not at all unlike brothers. The boys packed Hun's things back into the knapsack and set off for the university. They walked and talked until the very end. Hun told how he moved here and why he entered this particular university. At this time, they were being watched by an unknown character. He was sitting on a roof nearby and was wearing a strange mask. It amused him very much that they were together now. The guy with whom Hun met at the very beginning of the journey was a friend of the guy in the mask and he informed him about their location. Meanwhile, the boys have almost reached their goal. Hun was pleasantly surprised by this beauty, as this was his first visit. He could not fall in love with this beauty. He was almost in the center of the city. While Hun looked at the institute, the boy was talking on the phone. Hun still did not believe that he was accepted here. Because the university exceeded all his expectations. A girl was standing nearby who was trying to attract their attention and was waving her hand. She said she had waited long enough for them to come. Hun asked if she wanted to see him. The guy introduced her as Dana. Then he wanted to introduce the teenager to her. But at the last moment he forgot his name. That's why I decided to ask. Hun was upset and a little offended. But then he got scared for some reason and moved away from her. The guy asked if she knew him. Dana replied that she did and added that they were the same age. But the teenager was even more frightened when he realized that she knew his age. The girl admitted that she was looking for information about him a little before the meeting. But he considered it illegal, because it was his personal information. She held out her hand and said she was very happy to finally meet him. Hun bewilderedly shook her hand and said he was glad to meet her too. The girl's expression changed for some reason when they shook hands. She abruptly removed her hand and was very surprised. Hun asked why she reacted like that and maybe something was wrong with his hand. But Dana replied that everything was fine, she just wanted to check something. A smile appeared on her face and she offered to explain everything on the way. They entered the institute to inspect the infrastructure and classroom layout. Dana showed him where the building of his faculty was located, a 24-hour convenience store, and a bookstore in the basement. There was a library nearby, so she suggested taking a good look at everything so as not to get confused. This place was much bigger than he thought. It's easy to get lost here even if you've been here before. The girl offered Hun to take the university card for jealousy. Dana asked if Joe was saying anything strange to him. Hun didn't even have time to ask his savior what his name was. He began to remember to answer this question. The girl did not expect an answer and asked if he said something similar to the fact that he saved the world in a past life. The teenager immediately confirmed this information. Judging by his reaction, the girl understood that he did not explain anything to him. That day, Hun thought that maybe he had just made a bad joke. Joe came up to them and asked what he thought about it now. Hun replied that nothing had changed since then, except that he learned his name. Dana said that he had been spying on him for 2 weeks and still thought he was joking. Hun was immediately embarrassed and asked how she knew about it. But the girl asked not to worry because she was also following him. She asked him to remember Joe's daily life and what was happening to him all the time. Dana said that it can be really annoying. Hun had nothing to say. To be honest, when he himself saw what was happening to him every day, he was no longer sure that he was joking then. But he said that to keep the conversation going, because he still thought Joe was joking. Dana said it wasn't a lie. Because he really was a hero once. And he has a memory from his past life that he cannot forget. The teenager asked if she believed him. Dana answered that she didn't just trust him. And she admitted that she was the same as him and remembered her past life. Although the girl also could not prove it in any way based on the facts. But there was one way he could find out who they were. The girl touched his nose and asked him to look at Joe. He had to see the aura around him. Hun did see some sparks around him. But the girl said that it is not necessary to poke his fingers at him. Because she could not see them, because they were not ordinary people. But the boy could not believe that she did not see it. They were very bright. But in fact, they were invisible to other people. Even Joe himself does not see them. Most likely, only he saw them. Then the girl asked him to give her his hand. She put it on hers and said as soon as he can touch someone, they will also be able to see them. She also saw them for the first time. Hun decided to ask Dana if she even knew what those sparks meant. She explained that these were bits of Joe's luck. Power, wealth. It all comes from these particles of luck. This power was given to Joe after his heroic deeds. So was his ability to see these sparks. Besides them, there were only a few people who can also see it. She kept talking about past lives, but he had no memories of it. Dana knew this information and it was very strange. He could see the power, and they could only weakly feel it. And through physical contact, he can allow others to see them as well. Therefore, he had to be reborn, but he had no memories. She had only two explanations for this. Either he was hiding something from them. Or he hasn't remembered yet and the time will come when he will. He assumed that he might also have been a hero in a past life. They didn't know that. There were reincarnated heroes like them. But there were also terrible thieves. Hun didn't remember anything, so they couldn't know which side he was on. That's why she followed him closely and wanted to meet in person. They had a guess as to why they were reborn. If they were given a new life because of their past life actions, then the reason for their rebirth may be related to saving the world. And they think Hun can be a part of that story, even if he doesn't want to be. He went outside after a long walk around the institute. Although it was just a walk, he felt mentally exhausted. Dana calmed down only when she realized that he was completely without strength. But he did not understand anything from what she said. His dad texted him that he would be buying at the store for their dinner. While he was corresponding with his father, it began to rain heavily outside. And he didn't have an umbrella to get home normally. The forecast said that it would be sunny all day. He allowed the option of staying there until the rain calmed down. Then he remembered that the guy he met at the beginning of the road said that it would rain. And he warned him to quickly finish his work and go home. The boy decided not to stay there and ran home. Although he was very cold and got very wet as soon as he left the institute. While he was running, he thought that today was definitely not his lucky day. He finally reached home, but the rain had not stopped and he was running in the rain all the time. Hun got really wet and noticed that Dad hadn't come back from the store yet. The umbrella was at home, Dad didn't take it with him either. He decided to wash quickly and prepare everything for his arrival. The downpour continued for a very long time. But Dad still hasn't come home. The hours flew by very quickly and with every minute Hun became more and more worried. It was already evening, but there was no information from the father. The guy tried to call himself, but the caller was temporarily unavailable. Han couldn't understand why he hadn't returned for so long. Did something happen to him on the way to the store or when he was already walking back? The guy sat on the floor and calculated the chances of how this could really happen. And then Dad finally called him. Han picked up the phone and asked why he didn't pick up the phone, because he was very worried. He apologized and said that he was already going home. But in the background voices threatening him could be heard. Han understood that he had some problems, quickly dressed and ran to help. He came to the police station and began to testify. Han said he contacted his father at lunch, but he still hasn't returned home. And also he heard screams when he called 15 minutes ago. The policeman asked if his father had any mental illness. Han replied that he did not. The policeman looked down at the floor and thought. Han asked to find his father as soon as possible because he was most likely in danger. He decided to report the situation to the department. But he said that the absence of contact with a person for 5 hours cannot be considered missing. And they cannot consider it a kidnapping either, just one call at a time. The police assured the teenager that he would soon return home. But he did not believe in it. Because their family had a lot of debts. The boy recognized the faces of his kidnappers when he managed to get a good look at them. And now, for sure, they decided to kidnap Dad directly to get rid of his debt. He called around 5 p.m. It was still light then. Someone could see him and the guy started asking passersby. He asked almost every person he met on that street. Maybe they, like last time, took him to a remote place. Or they could have already done something much worse. Han didn't want to think about it, but the thoughts came flooding back. He ran so fast that his slippers tore. Then the boy fell to the ground. It was still raining heavily, but he did not pay attention to it. It was more important for him to understand where his father was and to find him. They did not know any of the neighbors, because they had only recently moved into this house. Also, the police could not help in any way. He did not understand what he should do and where to look for him now. And even when he finds him, he will be able to help and not be taken hostage again. The boy sat on the cold and wet ground in thought. And at that moment his phone rang. He took it out of his pocket and saw that it was his father. He picked up the receiver, but some other voice spoke there. They asked if it was a relative of the owner of the phone. This person said there was an accident and he called the emergency number. The guy arrived at the scene of the accident. People were discussing this situation and it seemed to them more that it was just that someone was hit and ran away from the scene of the accident. Han crawled through people to see everything with his own eyes and approach his father. But when he came closer, he was not satisfied with what he saw. A cart with incomprehensible things lay upside down on the ground and there was a lot of blood nearby. He turned his eyes slightly to the side and saw that his father was being carried on a stretcher to the ambulance. The boy wanted to run up to them and go with his dad. But he heard that someone was standing next to him and receiving calls. It was Joe and Dana standing next to each other under an umbrella and they could feel the call right next to them. And then they saw Han and immediately called him from his father's number. Joe also asked why he didn't have an umbrella. Han was shocked that it was this guy with his girlfriend again. He came to his aid again when he needed him so much. He started crying in front of them and Joe tried to comfort him. There were many people near the scene and the ambulance had already left. Suspicious 3 men watched the whole situation nearby. One of them was very angry and he looked as if something had gone wrong with their plan. An ambulance took his dad to the nearest hospital for a full examination. He was told that loan sharks were not involved. He was helping an old woman with a cart of boxes. But during this he was pushed by a motorcycle and rolled down the hill. Han asked Dana about this. She told him this information. Also, the girl was very surprised when she saw that he was crying and started talking about moneylenders and the like. The boy asked who called him on the phone. The girl said it was Joe. They were passing by when it all happened. When the girl called the guy for the first time from her father's number, Joe shouted next to her that the criminal was running away and that he needed to be caught. But Hun thought that it was bandits. Now everything became clear to him and much easier. That at least this is not connected with the attack or bandits. While he was talking to them, he saw Dad on the horizon, whom the doctors took out into the corridor. He immediately ran up to him and asked if he was okay. He replied that everything was fine, he just had a slight concussion. He was told to rest at home for a few days and come back if he got worse. Joe handed over his father's jacket and said that some ice packs would help with the concussion. Hun understood that Joe had already helped him many times. But he didn't admit it himself and said that he didn't really do anything special. If he should have thanked someone, it was Dana. She called an ambulance. Joe said he needed to go to the lab for the test results. But the boy understood something at that moment. When he was kidnapped, the fire brigade came to help. And it was not he who saved him from school bullies. Each time he just happened to pass by. Thanks to his aura of luck and fortune. He got into all these commotions. The same thing happened this time, they happened upon this accident. He remembered Joe asking him in the warehouse if he had been brought there against his will. One could guess that he did not come there because he just wanted to. And in fact, his task is really to save people and help them. Hun grabbed his hand and thanked him for stopping to help his father. The boy looked at him with surprised eyes and wanted to say something. Hun continued to thank him for not passing by and helping. Dad was given a full examination and after that he was allowed to go home. They gathered and said goodbye to Joe and Dana and wished them a safe journey. They were watched all the time by a guy in a mask who had already appeared during the day. He said they were like best friends having dinner at home together. This guy in the mask asked the assistant to bring him this particular man. He said he almost caught him, but this motorcyclist appeared and knocked him down. Maska said that everything is fine and he no longer needs an assistant. A guy Hun met on the street said he needed to get into the game. The next day was the first day of classes for freshmen. There were a lot of excited and curious newbies on campus. But his studies at this university began in a completely different way. He couldn't even expect that this would happen right then. Comrade Joe found hooligans who were trying to beat up and take all things and money from Hun. He was scared because he didn't even know who was standing in front of him. This guy was scary enough and it was hard not to be scared the first time you met him. Hun came closer and began to examine these guys. Then he realized that they were the same thugs who caught him in the sleeping area when he was on his way to the university. Hun thought that it was the leader of their gang who had come to avenge them. So he began to make excuses and said that he had not caused any harm to his boys. And Hun began to slowly move back to run at any moment. But Joe came up behind and said it was dangerous to walk backwards. He asked what happened and the boy replied that there was an angry boy who brought hooligans from the sleeping area. Joe was surprised at first and went over to see what kind of guy it was. Hun remembered that this guy was there too and he wanted to warn Joe sooner before he got closer. Hun stood at a distance and shouted short sentences to Joe. But in reality it was his friend and he asked him not to look down on people so much because he scares them. He did not expect to see him in this place. What a strange coincidence. The boy started to smile when he realized that it was his friend who approached. Then he relaxed and simply said that he was too engrossed in intimidating these bullies that he didn't have time to step out of the role. Although he looked scary, he was not to be feared. These guys looked very bad and were badly beaten. Hun asked who this guy is if not a bully. Is he the same as Joe from Dana? He replied that it was true. His name was Gon. He was also a hero in his past life and they worked together. He led the troops on the front line. What bothered Hun was why these three bullies were on their knees. Gon was surprised that he hadn't heard of this situation yet. Because these scumbags were involved in yesterday's motorcycle adventure. Hun was surprised and did not understand how he managed to catch them. The guy remembered the phrases he heard on the phone. That he was running away and had to catch up with him. He was exactly the person who chased after him. And then they received a 12-hour traffic safety briefing at his home. And he got full consent from their parents. It sounded a lot more ethical than Hun expected. Gon actually expected a different reaction because he heard that earlier, they tried to rob him. And he thought that the boy would enjoy their situation. But he said he just felt sorry for them. On their knees and all bruised. Gon said he was too nice. He said Hun could report them to the police and they would have to pay the medical bills and compensation for the injury. The hooligans discussed among themselves that in this way they could have big problems. While they were talking, a lot of people appeared around. They got out of a big bus and headed towards the university. Maybe they were the parents of the students. She saw this as her chance to escape from responsibility. Hun was also not used to being in such a crowd and felt uncomfortable. Dana said there were a lot of people there because morning classes had started. While they were talking to each other, Gon noticed something important. These hooligans ran away while they were a little distracted. Seizing the moment while there was a large crowd. He was very angry because he was distracted for just 1 second. Joe called someone and said that those guys on the motorcycles got away. They were last seen near the 13th building. Joe was told that next time they would be on the 2nd floor of the 11th building. Hun asked who he got this information from. It was Dana. He hadn't seen her on serious missions yet. His power is luck, while Dana and Gon have other abilities. Gon already had a negative attitude towards bullies. Joe offered to watch him in action. They very quickly reached the 11th building near the main entrance to the university. Hun asked again how he knew they were going there. Joe replied that Dana told him. If they run from building 13, they'll have to run from the bus stop with the crowd. They won't be able to run far, so they'll most likely hide in the nearest campus building. At the moment, the 11th building is the most free, there is a high probability that they will go there. They won't climb higher than 3 floors. And they won't be able to pass a 400-level PE class. A group of weak high schoolers just won't dare. They had little choice, so they would most likely stay near the emergency exit. There were 5 emergency exits in this building. So the chance was 1 in 5 and with Joe's luck they would be able to find them right away. That's how it turned out. They found them and the boys started to run away. The hooligans did not understand how they could know that they would come there. Gon thought he had shown them how scary he could be last night. They were shocked to see this guy again. Joe asked if Hun could see the fire around Gon. The guy said he could. This was the superpower of this scary and dangerous guy. It was a skill only available to him. A few minutes of practice and he could master any instrument. As if he had been training for this all his life. He continued to give nightmares to these hooligans for daring to escape. They pressed more and more to each other and to the floor. They were very scared and did not want to suffer again at the hands of this sadist. He warned them that if they tried to escape again, he would blow their brains out. It worked because they already knew how aggressive he was and that he was always responsible for his every word. He didn't hear any repentance from them. How dare they run away? They said they were sorry. Hun ran up and asked Gon to stop because they didn't want to actually hurt them. He asked the hooligans if they did not suffer, but they considered him a two-faced scum who hid behind others' backs. One of them started yelling at him and said that he is cool because he can hide behind the backs of powerful friends. If he felt so sorry for them, why did he involve his friends instead of sending them to the police? They are minors, so they would receive only a few months of community service. Because as a result, they did not take away his money and no one died in the accident. Hun could not stand such pressure and grabbed Gon's mop because he was very angry. He sped up with all his might and started running towards his offenders. Hun began beating them mercilessly with a mop for being such horrible people. Joe and Gon had no idea that he could be so angry and aggressive. He didn't want to hear them anymore, because it was because of them that this matter had become serious. They sat very quietly pressed to each other. The boy could not control himself and aggressively set himself against them. But then he apologized because he got emotional at the moment. The law protected juvenile offenders because the system did not want to overpunish teenagers who might make mistakes due to immaturity. But it is not a passage that grants them unlimited forgiveness whenever they decide they deserve it. They behave uncontrollably and irresponsibly. But someone will still have to be responsible for everything that happens. It was very important for them to consciously approach their actions before they reach adulthood. He didn't care if they refused to pay and he didn't care if they received a downward penalty for their actions. Yesterday, because of their fun trip, he almost lost his only family member. He expected to hear a few words from them and the boy knew that they had something to say. They all said together that they were sorry. After this conversation they let them go and hoped that it would somehow affect their brains. Dana came up and asked if they managed to catch the hooligans. Gon replied that she was a few minutes late. Gon even had a bit of a crush on this guy. Dana asked what he was talking about. The first impression of Hun was not very good. He was thin and not very interesting. But as it turned out, he can really defend his opinion. He was very much like Joe, a good helpless boy. Gon was overjoyed and said that it meant something to all of them. He hugged him and said he was stuck with them now. Hun said that it scared him a lot, but he is happy that he was able to meet such people. One of the hooligans who participated in the motorcycle race decided to call his mother. He said he wanted to talk about a hit-and-run accident. The mother said she had already covered the medical bill for the man's treatment. He thanked her, but she was not used to it and asked why he was saying that. The guy replied that he was just saying thanks. Hun, after hugging Gon, realized that he was getting on his nerves a lot. The boy woke up in an unknown place with a tear running down his cheek. He got up and realized that water was dripping on top of him. But he wondered where she had come from and where he was. There was nothing around, absolute darkness. Only him and a white spot on the floor that was illuminated. He heard that someone was talking to him, but he did not understand where the voice was coming from. Someone apologized to him while he was sitting on that spot. The voice of forgiveness to give him at least a chance and forgive him this time. He promised to do better next time. Hun had already heard this voice somewhere. The guy woke up in his bed at home in a cold sweat. He was very frightened and only after some time was he able to understand that it was a dream. Because of this, he did not sleep at all and was constantly yawning. He was lucky that he only had a briefing that day. He pulled out the map Joe had given him at the beginning of their meeting downtown. He needed to get to the main gate to catch the bus. And as soon as he approached the stop, bus number 13 immediately pulled up. He entered it, but there was no one there except one person. She was very strange, all wrapped up in clothes and sitting very quietly. She had a tablet in her hands, but the screen was just all white. When Hun boarded this bus, the number 13 was written on it. But when he sat down, the number somehow changed to 20. After some time he reached the place he needed. It was the final stop and the driver asked the passengers to leave the bus. When he went outside, he did not understand where he was at all. This was not the place he needed to be. He tried to stop the bus and gave various signs, but all in vain. He needed to find a stop. He saw a group of teenagers talking and hurrying somewhere. Apart from them, there was no one else there at all. Just silence. He had no choice and decided to walk back. He had been walking from that stop for more than an hour. And it seemed that he got lost again. Was that dream trying to tell him that this would happen? Hun collected his thoughts and strength and decided to call Dana. But when he took out the phone, there was no connection at all. He did not understand how a forest could appear in the middle of a university campus. He barely managed to call Dana, but the connection was still very poor. He tried to say that he did not know where he was because he got on the wrong bus. And now there were only trees around him, and it seemed as if some animal would jump out at him now. And so it happened, but not an animal, but some human hand touched him. Since he was standing with his back, he began to shout very loudly. Then he decided to turn around and saw not a beast nearby, but a girl with glasses. They stood still for a few minutes and looked at each other. Due to the fact that she scared him, the call was interrupted. The girl began to apologize. It's just that she hasn't seen anyone for 2 days. The guy said that it's okay, he just didn't get lost and she scared him. Then he listened to her words and asked how she had not seen anyone for days. She cried and said that she had been here in the forest for 2 days. Hun suggested that she go along and find a way out of this forest. They set off together, they needed to get out before it got dark. She was very happy that she had company. She had been alone for so long that she was already embarrassed. Her name was Mia. She was in her 3rd year studying agriculture. Translated, Mia meant the one who went missing. The guy also introduced himself as Hun. And he said that he was studying in the 1st year of Korean literature. She knew him in absentia. And she also knew about his excellent friends. Finally, she had hope. He should have made friends with her. What a coincidence that they met in the forest. The boy did not understand what she was talking about. Mia said she had been in the forest for 2 days, so he asked how she managed to survive. On the first day she did not sleep or eat and kept walking. But the next day she accidentally found a tent and was able to rest. Hun immediately asked where it was. The girl went to the nearest bush and said that she was there. And behind these bushes there really was a tent. Most likely, it was left by the guys from the camping club. If she couldn't get out today as well, then she would have to use their kindness again and take their things again. It was strange that she planned to come back here. But when they came closer, they saw that someone's feet were visible from the tent. It seems that someone really was there and rested. Mia thought that it was the owner of the tent and she was glad that he probably knew the way and they would be saved. But there lay the one Hun least expected to meet. This was a guy they met when he was looking for a way to the institute. The guy said that he didn't even have to look for him. Hun pointed the finger at him and called him a fraud. He checked his phone and there were a lot of messages. Then he added that being called a fraud hurts his feelings. While they were trying to talk to each other, Mia asked if they knew each other. Hun replied that they had met once. It was the boy who asked if his father was better after the accident. He was shocked that he knew about the accident. He continued to tell everything that happened. He knew that he was beaten and ran away. He considered it a failure and felt very sorry for the Hun. Then the boy said that now it will hurt him and he hoped for his understanding. After these words, the boy kicked Hun in the chest. He was shocked by this development and could not understand what was happening. At that time, the boy stood and smiled nearby. Then he leaned closer to the boy and seemed to want to find something. He started touching his face with his foot and did not hit him hard. Then he put his foot on his hand so that he could not move. He obviously wanted to see something. But there was no effect. He decided that contact with the skin was needed. The boy grabbed his face with his hand and began to squeeze him. And it helped him see what he needed. He didn't have to use his hand. Maybe even the cut part would work for that. Hun just lay there and tried to understand what was happening to him now. The boy was so intently studying the behavior of Hun's body that he forgot about his girlfriend. She demanded that he stop because she caught the whole thing on camera. Mia told him to let her go or she would call the police. It amused him and he had a new idea. It was a good opportunity to test out my new power and see what it was like. He grabbed Hun's face again with his hand. And began aiming at the girl's head. He wanted to use it on her and asked Hun if he had seen the sight on her as well. Mia was an intelligent girl, but she did not know how to navigate in space at all and always got lost. There are people who remember their past lives and have special powers. Only he could see the manifestation of their abilities. But for him, it all looks like some kind of prank. The girl was just completely in his sights because of his new ability. Hun just stared at her and couldn't do anything about it. It turned out that he was one of the thieves Dana was talking about. The boy turned to Hun and asked him a question. Where should he aim, at which part of the body is better? He asked not to worry, because people do not die from one word. Hun was completely confused and did not understand what the guy was talking about. He offered to see what would be better. An inexplicable purple cloud began to emerge from his mouth. He said he wanted to try to use understanding and took the key out of his mouth, which was moving right in front of the boy's eyes. It was also purple in color. But he said something went wrong because there was a misunderstanding. Then he began to change the setting from understanding to thinking. He said that she wanted to ask him for directions to get out of this forest. It seems that she has been wandering here for a long time and must have gotten tired. The forest was big enough. He said if she goes ahead, she will get to the stop. The bus from there goes to the main gate, so she definitely won't get lost there. Hun just lay on the ground the whole time and watched it. This key simply went into one of the sights and turned. She thought something strange was happening, but actually the girl felt relieved. If things get out of hand, they can run to the bus stop. Something began to happen to her consciousness. Then she came to her senses and said that this is not the point now. And asked her not to speak. She had everything recorded on camera. The boy thought that she probably thought he was torturing Hun. But this is a misunderstanding. He knew Ja from high school. He often took his things. He heard that he entered Shoshone University. He saw that he rummaged through his armor. And these were very expensive things. So he was shocked when he called him a fraud. Mia said that he wasn't the one touching his stuff, she was. She began apologizing and said she would refund him for everything. It seems he didn't quite understand something. It was very surprising that all these trials had been prepared for them today. This guy pretended to be really sorry. And then he added that he understood that Mia needed it more at that moment. It happens. He doesn't need any money, he'll just say he lost it. After his speech, he removed his hand from Hun's face. As soon as his mouth was free, the boy asked what he was doing all this for. He advised to think very carefully about what he said here. Hun tried to find some logical connection between his words and actions. But nothing worked. At that time, he opened the lock of his mind with a key. Something incomprehensible began to happen to the girl. And after some time, she already said goodbye to them and went home. Since the guy showed her the way to the stop. Hun started asking a lot of questions and why did he do that and how did he know about his father. The guy realized that now he will bombard him with various questions. He also asked if he had been a thief in his past life. This question surprised the boy the most. His face showed absolutely no emotion. But after a minute he started to laugh very hard and loudly. He asked if this was explained to him by his new friends. And most likely they still called themselves heroes. The boy hoped that he did not believe it. But after meeting them, he is ready to believe it without hesitation. He had slightly different information about it. He said that the loan sharks were after his father that rainy day. But he did not understand how he knew this. He could not say this, but he knew for sure that his father would not be hurt, even if he was caught. In the end, his father suffered. It was because of the actions of this high-minded little hero Joe. He said he would just ask one more question. Hun began to see his powers the day he met Joe. The teenager began to remember the very day when he was saved from being kidnapped. Then he was the only one who managed to save from the fire. He himself could not believe that he remained alive after such a thing. His body was covered in wounds and burns, he had no shoes on his feet, but he was alive. As he was walking to the policeman, he ran into Joe. He raised his head and immediately apologized for his inattention. And when he looked closely, he saw an inexplicable glow around Joe. It was very bright and covered the boy's entire body. Judging by his face, the boy was right about the fact that he began to see the power the day he first met Joe. He might have thought he saved him that time, but really he just made him feel like a debtor. Because Joe had always been like that. One day he deceived him in the same way. He asked not to trust him very much. They got close to him not because they like him. They just need his power. Otherwise, why would they show such kindness to a stranger? He was just an anomaly. He had the power, but no memories of his past life. He didn't know what he did and when, and he doesn't remember any of them either. It is more logical to be friends with Joe right away, and not to become enemies. He said that it was most likely Dana's intrigues. She always behaved like that. At that moment, Dana herself appeared. She said that he was always afraid to say it to their faces and continued to secretly tease them. He has not changed at all. Hyo was close enough to speak to Hun. With one swing of his leg, he called his assistant. It was a ball of fire that moved from tree to tree. Hun watched what was happening as if fascinated. It was the guy in the mask who followed Hun a few days ago. Gon also appeared with Dana. He was very angry. He looked scary enough, but it was time for Hyo to go. He thanked Hun for the conversation and they were about to leave. Gon started yelling at him and told him he wasn't going anywhere this time. But Hyo wasn't going to ask permission, he just wanted to disappear. Because they had much more important things to do, Joe would talk about it as he left. His assistant was very sharp and agile, so they disappeared from the horizon in a few seconds. Gon wanted to catch up with this bastard, but Hun asked him to wait. He felt sick and felt as if his head would explode. He wanted to be explained what was happening to him. Hyo fled to safety. The aide asked if this conversation would be enough. Because he didn't look like someone who was ready to go over to their side. He was sure that this was enough, because the main thing was to sow the seeds of doubt. Now Hun will not be able to fully trust them and they will still have a chance. This guy needed Ja first. There were various things on the table, it was like a world for torture. A person was sitting on the couch and was probably waiting for someone. It was Hyo's second assistant who was in charge of the technical part. He entered the house and said that he thought she would return to her home. She took out a sharpened hook. Hyo stepped back and said that it was very threatening. The girl replied that he had left her no other choice. He promised to bring her a present after the task. They had a contract. She hacks the bus control system, and he gets a surprise. He even lived in her house. At first he promised her a person. Then he ignored her calls and also took all her supplies in case of unusual situations. Hyo said that when they met, she would definitely like him. But she understood that he had not been able to recruit him to her side. He argued because he swallowed his bait. From Joe's point of view, they are just strangers at this point. It will definitely be difficult for him to understand everything. Because he does not understand what they are talking about. People trust the warnings of strangers more than the kind words of a friend they recently met. He will definitely not forget his words until he understands their essence. The girl said that her boss was really the worst person she had ever met. He replied that he loved her too. Dana, Gon, Joe and Hun gathered together to tell about their past in detail. Several hundred years ago there was a war here in which they won. But at the same time, they all died after this battle. Technically speaking, their lives should have ended there. But when they came to their senses, they became primary school students in the 21st century. And the memories from the past life returned as soon as they turned 10 years old. Hun asked if they were sure that these memories were true. Gon said 100%. They had the same personalities, faces. They didn't know why, but even their names remained the same. And they were not at all like their parents in this life. Only the age has changed, because here they are all of the same age and strength. Gon always found it easy to learn new skills, but he wasn't that strong. Joe too. In a past life he didn't have the ability with luck. It was as if their powers were able to truly reveal themselves only now when they were reborn. This is exactly what he saw in front of him. It was not very logical, but it was true. Maybe it all happened because of Joe's luck in her new life. They found out that they went to the same school, so they didn't even have to look for each other. Hyo was also from a past life and attended the same school as them. He was quite an avid athlete, so he spent a lot of time on the sports field. Hyo had not been like this since the beginning of their new life. It was the same boy he had seen recently in the city and then in the forest. Hun really wanted to know information about him and who he was. Dana saw that he was really interested in this and even needed to answer all the questions for himself. And remove all doubts. The girl began to tell what happened in her past life. He sold their nation for which they fought and gave their lives. It shocked Hun, he didn't expect to hear such a thing. Dana continued and said that he had sold their lands to the enemy by deception. It was because of this that a great war between nations began. The guy didn't understand how he managed to do it with the help of deception. The girl asked if he saw his power. He said that he saw. A key appeared from his mouth and opened something. With the help of this key, he seems to have weakened a person's barriers. Dana wondered about this, but it was to be expected. He was always a fraud. He easily managed to lie to people and get what he wanted from them. If he became stronger after his rebirth, like them, then it is very bad. He will only need a few words and people will begin to follow his orders. The boy began to recall how he had experimented on Mia in his presence. The girl continued, there were usually two types of people who came into contact with Joe. Some benefit him and help him in every way. Others harm him. Hyo obviously belonged to the second category. From the age of 10, they were constantly in the same class. And in high school, Hyo switched to homeschooling. They treated him with suspicion, although there was no particular reason for this. At least earlier. The boys went berserk and Hun asked what happened next. Gon was a fool to think that this scum could change and trusted him. In that region, the crime rate has risen sharply. They learn that Hyo has been in contact with various gangs. Not sure, but think he made a move. There is a high probability that he is involved in the case of his father. But they said that his power was only in words and moral pressure. The boy hoped that all of them together would be able to stop him. But he was not alone. They are sure that at the moment 2 more are working with him, so there are 3 of them in total. But they have not seen and do not know their names and faces yet. But they said that their appearance is the same as in the past life. It is logical that they could remember what they look like. Everyone who worked for Hyo kept their names and faces secret at all times. And there were a lot of them, they were not sure why he was able to be reborn with him. That's why they watched Hun so closely after Hyo found him. They didn't remember him and didn't know if he happened to be a supporter of Hyo. But it seems that he is also seeing him for the first time. But for some reason he was very happy about it. It only means that he is most likely on the good side. There is a high probability that he is also a star like Joe. Everyone immediately got into a strange festive mood. Hun remembered Hio's words that you shouldn't let them get too close and trust them. He said he understood their situation and asked what he could do next. Dana would like to answer that question, but they still can't figure out what Hio is up to. One thing is for sure, he will do whatever it takes to get Hun on his side. This is already a problem even if he has the best intentions. But if he wants to capture the Hun at any cost, then he will be in great danger. Therefore, they are forced to watch him very closely. He may find them very persistent and he may not like it, but they should carefully monitor his surroundings. Even if it is for preventive purposes. Hun tried to gather all the information into a heap and structure it in his head. After all he's seen, he can't say he doesn't believe them. And he can't refuse when they all want to protect him. In fact, he should thank them. Because honestly, he thought today would be the day he died. That is, if he wants to stay away from Hio, then he just needs to stick out less. For some reason, this information was not at all clear to them. Hun seemed to ask a simple question, but never heard an answer to it. But then they said that such an idea could be difficult to implement. When he first entered the classroom, everyone applauded him. His name was Hun, and according to rumors, he was a legend. He hadn't even been here for 3 weeks, but he had already started making friends with the trio. No one understood how he managed to do it. Someone said they saw Dana showing him around the campus. The whole university knew these three, so it was very difficult for him not to draw attention to himself. Then he remembered Mia, who said in the forest that he had great friends. It was lunchtime and all the students went to the cafeteria. Some girls could not escape and almost had a fight. One of them said that she is not so clumsy. And at that moment she accidentally pushes Hun. He falls to the ground and the girl starts screaming and apologizing to him. Her friend warned her to be more careful with her tray. Then she looked closely at the guy who was knocked off her feet by her friend. And she saw that it was the freshman that everyone was talking about. The one who had connections and was friends with the informed trio. Dana was a sophomore from the Faculty of Politics and International Relations. From the first day, she was in first place in her department, kind and smart. She knew almost everyone at the university, regardless of year and department. She gave the best advice. Even in non-campus matters. People ask her for advice on stocks and finances. It is not known how smart she really is. It is known that even professors and investors turn to her for help. From her stories, Dana made millions from her investments. She had her own business card. Everyone called her the Dana voucher. When the woman helps you, she gives you this card as a debt receipt. This meant that now you have to do them a favor. It didn't sound very interesting to her friend. But the girl advised how to get in touch with her as soon as possible, because it solves a lot. Next up was Gon, a sophomore in the athletics department. Everyone in the arts and athletics departments knows him. During sports competitions, whether it's tennis or archery, all the athletes want him on their team. In addition to sports, he is a master in the construction and repair of machines. He is impeccable in all technical aspects. He looks scary, but he is very simple in fact and it is easy to find a common language with him.